Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. And today we've got a MrBallen video, and this is tragedy, shocking photos, and fatal hair. Top 3 strange but true, mature audiences. And we gonna get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, comment your think down below. If you'd like to help the channel with a donation, you can leave a super thanks or link to my PayPal's in the description. Let's go.
The truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please invite the like button to go on an all-expenses paid trip to Venice, Italy, and the second you're both in a gondola, push them into the canal.
That's just evil. That's just wrong and evil. That's just messed up, man.
Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On April 16, 2024, a 42-year-old woman named Erica Nunes and her 68-year-old uncle named Paulo Braga arrived at a bank in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro in a cab. Erica got out of the back seat first and then asked the driver to wait so she could go inside the bank to get a wheelchair for her uncle because recently he had been sick with pneumonia in the hospital. She found one in the lobby and then wheeled it back outside. When she got back to the cab, the driver helped her lift her uncle Paulo into the wheelchair, and then afterward, Erica thanked the driver, and then she wheeled her uncle up to the bank, and as she got near the door, a bank attendant came out and opened up the door for them to go inside. Erica smiled at the attendant. Her uncle had been living with her for the past 8 months, and so Erica was pretty accustomed to some level of caretaking, but it had gotten a lot harder recently with her uncle being in the hospital with pneumonia, and so Erica was just exhausted, and so little gestures like this were very appreciated. But despite her exhaustion, today was a really good day for Erica, because her uncle was so appreciative for all the help that he had actually offered to go to this bank with her today and take out a loan for her in his name so she could do some much needed repairs around her house. So Erica and her uncle made their way through the bank towards the front desk and then told the attendant that they needed to see a loan officer. She explained that they had already called ahead and her uncle had been approved for a loan. He was just here now to sign the paperwork. The attendant nodded and then typed a few things on their computer and then came out from behind the desk and led Erica and her uncle to a desk in back to wait for the loan officer. A minute later, when Erica saw the loan officer approaching the desk, she stood up and smiled and was about to say hello, but the loan officer did not smile back. Instead, she just glared at Erica and her uncle in a way that made Erica feel very uncomfortable. And then, instead of shaking their hands, the loan officer just turned around and walked away. Erica looked around in confusion and then sort of sat down awkwardly, feeling worried and also a little annoyed. She turned and watched as this loan officer continued walking away and then stopped next to some employee. She bent down and whispered something in the employee's ear, and Erica watched as this employee's eyes went wide as she heard whatever the loan officer said. And then this loan officer and that employee, they got up and they vanished into a back room of the bank. So now Erica was feeling really weird about all of this. She turned to her uncle and she saw he couldn't even meet her eyes. So she reached out and just began massaging his neck and shoulders. A little while later, the loan officer would come back to the desk, and this time she was carrying this huge stack of papers, and she placed it on the desk in front of Erica's uncle. But instead of sitting down and going over this huge amount of paperwork with them, the loan officer just stood there staring at Erica, and Erica stared right back. And for about 30 seconds, there was just tense silence. And then eventually, the loan officer pulled out her phone and very obviously started filming. And so now Erica went from feeling just uncomfortable to feeling sort of afraid. I mean, this was definitely not normal bank behavior, even for a seemingly very rude employee. But Erica decided to kind of ignore the weirdness and just get her uncle started on the paperwork. But after a few minutes, Erica began to hear the sound of emergency sirens outside the bank. And when she looked up, she saw all these police and first responders running towards her. The video that loan officer shot that day of Erica and her uncle went viral in Brazil. In this video, Erica is seen smiling and attempting to help her uncle sign this paperwork, and she's obviously holding up her uncle's head. But her uncle is not weak from illness. Her uncle is dead. In fact, he had died out.
thought this was gonna be the case. What the fuck? So what so did no one else notice this? That he was, like, the cab driver not notice that the guy was dead? Did everyone else, was the loan officer the first to notice it? Like, the bank assist person opened the door, didn't notice it, nothing, and the bank looked one quick look at it, and they're like, oh no, he dead. Oh, he's dead, we gotta get police here on her. What the that's messed up, man. This is messed up. What the hell, bro?
Hours before, Erica had brought him to the bank. Now, Erica later claimed that she had no idea her uncle was dead. However, it was very obvious to everyone around her, which is why all the bank employees were acting so strange. Erica was arrested.
So she went there with the dead corpse, hoping to sign the paperwork still and get the loan and still get the money. That was her goal. It just failed horribly.
And held for 16 days before being released on bail. She faces charges of abusing a corpse and attempted theft through fraud. Her case has not yet been adjudicated.
I am so curious I'd love to know how this case ends. If she's not sentenced, I'll be shocked.
Thanks to DraftKings for sponsoring this.
On the prowl. Yep.
On the night of October 20th, 2021, two young couples were hanging out inside of a little home in the woods in Henderson County, North Carolina. The couples were Rachel and her fiancé Chris, and their friends Autumn and Jake, whose home it was. Rachel and Autumn were in the kitchen preparing to dye Rachel's hair over the sink. Jake and Chris were in the living room discussing the very strange sightings of a black panther that had been reported all over town in recent days. So, North Carolina does have big cats, including panthers. After all, their professional football team is named the Carolina Panthers. However, the panthers in North Carolina are typically of the brownish color, not the pitch black variety like the panther that was apparently prowling all over Henderson County in recent days. Nonetheless, Chris was absolutely convinced that he had seen this black panther about a week ago when he was out walking his and Rachel's new puppy. He swore the panther had been following him in the tree line around his property, and he had been afraid it was thinking about attacking his dog. Ever since, he told Jake he'd been nervous walking around his property outside, and so he'd begun to carry a gun for protection. Jake was in the middle of telling Chris that he too was now carrying a gun around for the same reason, when they were interrupted by Rachel calling for Chris from the kitchen. Jake and Chris got up off the couch and walked into the kitchen, where Rachel told them that she'd been trying to show Autumn a YouTube video about how to dye hair at home when her phone had died. And so she asked Chris if he wouldn't mind going back to their apartment and getting her a phone charger. Now, obviously, Chris was not thrilled about going into the woods at night, with this panther roaming around, but he loved his fiancée and would do anything for her, and he had his gun, so he said he would go. And as Chris headed to the door to leave, Jake said, "Hold on a minute." He grabbed his flashlight and grabbed his gun and told Chris he would tag along and watch his buddy's back. The two guys said they'd be back in a minute, and then they walked out the door. A light wind rustled the leaves of the trees as Jake and Chris set out on the little path that connected their two homes. They both stayed absolutely quiet as they walked, because they wanted to make sure they could hear any indication of this panther being nearby. But all they could hear was the wind, some crickets, and an owl hooting in the distance. But about halfway down the path, Chris suddenly heard something coming from the woods and instinctively shot out his hand to stop Jake in his tracks. They both froze, and then Jake raised his flashlight and shined it at the underbrush where Chris was saying he had heard noise. And for a second, all they saw were green leaves. But then, two eyes opened up and reflected back at them. The two men gasped and instinctively reached for their guns, but before they had to draw and do anything, this creature emerged from the underbrush, and it was just a raccoon. Chris and Jake laughed in relief, and then continued walking down the path to Chris's house. They went inside, got Rachel's charger, and then they left and stepped back into the woods. But now, as Chris and Jake walked along this dark path, something just felt different. The crickets seemed to have gotten quieter and the wind had picked up. The owl that had been hooting before must have flown away because it was now strangely quiet, except for the sound of their footsteps and the wind in the trees. They were about 40 feet away from Jake's house when they suddenly heard a twig snap to their left. And so the two men turned to face the noise, and as they did, they heard another sound, a low, raspy growl. And so Jake aimed his flashlight at the bush where these noises had come from, and this time it was obvious it was not a raccoon, because the bushes were literally shaking like some enormous animal was inside of them. And so the two men looked at each other with wide eyes, and without saying a word, they both knew they were thinking the same thing. It's the panther. And so the two men drew their guns and they aimed it at the bush, hoping that this thing would just take off back into the woods. But it didn't. The bush continued to shake like whatever it was gonna leap out. And so the men just opened fire, and they kept on shooting until they heard a new horrible sound. And the second they heard it, they dropped their guns. It would turn out that was not a panther. After Chris and Jake had left the house, Rachel and Autumn decided to pull a prank. They had found some expired eggs in the fridge, and they had decided they would go hide in the bushes near that pathway and pelt the guys with them. When Rachel saw Chris and Jake approaching, she tried to crouch down lower in the bush so as not to be seen, but as she did, she stepped on a twig. And at the same time, in anticipation of their prank, the women started to laugh. They tried to stifle their laughter, but that only made them snort and shake the bushes. And that combination of noises, the snapped twig, the stifled laughter, which sort of resembled a short raspy growl, and the shaking bushes, signaled to the guys that this was no prank. This was the panther, and if they didn't act, it might attack them. And so they drew their guns and they began to shoot until they heard Autumn scream out in horror. Tragically, by the time they had stopped shooting, it was already too late for Rachel.
Okay, look, I'm sorry. I know you know you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead. These women have to be considered fucking idiots, right? Like, I'm not trying to... They have to be considered idiots because who in the... You have heard these two guys talk about how they're scared of this panther. They're worried this panther might do something to them when they're around their property. So they have guns to make sure their property is... to make sure they're safe. And they are terrified of this panther. Why the fuck, on any scenario, if you were going to prank them, would you do it outside in the woods, hiding in a bush at night? These women are fucking idiots. These women, I'm sorry, I know one of them is dead, I'm sorry, but they cannot be considered anything but fucking idiots. There was no logic. This was a dumb idea from the beginning. Oh, fucking stupid.
She had been shot to death. Law enforcement did an investigation into the shooting, and they declared it was just a horrible accident. Everybody was sober, and the two men were carrying their weapons legally, and so no one was ever charged with Rachel's death. And to this day, no one has ever gotten solid evidence that that Black Panther even exists.
That's so fucking unbelievable. I'm not even like the fact that that even happened. That is so fucking ridiculous, man. Oh, these women are so damn stupid.
On a snowy morning in 1972, 22-year-old Sotria Kritsonis sat at her bus stop in Seattle, Washington, adjusting her knit cap against the cold. The hat actually still felt pretty weird on her head because just a few days earlier, she had cut her brown hair super short, and so she wasn't quite used to it yet. But despite that, she loved her new hair. In fact, she'd deliberately worn this big hat to hide her haircut, because this would make the reveal to her friends at school that much better. She glanced up Rainer Avenue for any sign of her bus, but there wasn't one. The city's public transportation system was all out of whack that day because of the weather, and so Tria was becoming pretty impatient because now her bus was over an hour late. She'd already missed her first class of the day because of this bus, and now she was in danger of missing her second class.
I would think if your bus is over an hour late, I would just come to the conclusion it's not coming. Like, I would not wait outside for an hour for my bus. I'd be waiting about 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most. If you're late and they don't say anything, and then I'd be like, okay, you ain't coming. I'm just gonna skip school that day, I guess.
And that's when she heard the beep of a car horn, and a pale yellow Volkswagen Beetle rolled up to the curb right in front of her. So Tria had to squint through the snow, but she could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat of this car, and he was rolling down the window of the passenger side and kind of waving her over. Curious, she walked up to the now open window and leaned in, and the warmth coming from inside the car felt great. And this is where Sotria got her first real look at the driver. He was a good-looking guy in his 20s, he was well-dressed, pleasant-seeming, just an overall normal-looking person. He explained that he'd actually been driving on Rainer Ave for a while, and he hadn't seen a bus in a long time, and so he offered to give Sotria a ride to her school. But remember, this is the 1970s, and hitchhiking at the time in America was pretty common, especially on the West Coast where Sotria was. And so pretty quickly, she agreed to get in, because she knew this likely was her best chance at making it to school for her second class, and she was freezing. After the man pulled back onto Rainer Avenue, Sotria sat back in the seat, enjoying the warm air blasting out of the vents. And as she did, she looked out her window at the familiar route passing by. Sotria was about to apologize to this guy for making him drive so far out of his way when she heard him turn on his blinker. He was preparing to turn right. And this struck Sotria as odd because, as she had explained to him back on the curb, her school was a straight shot down Rainer Ave. There was no need to turn. So what was he doing? Sotria looked over at the man, expecting him to explain why they were taking this sudden detour. But the man just stared straight ahead. And then a moment later, she heard the blinker turned on again, and she looked up and saw they were about to merge onto Interstate 5 southbound, which was definitely not the way to Sotria's school. And now, Sotria felt a pang of fear. She opened her mouth to tell this guy he was going the wrong way, but he cut her off, and he looked at her and he said, "You know, it's a terrible idea to take a ride from a stranger." The man kept on.
Oh, that sounds fucked up. Oh, that's a fucked up thing to say as you're about to do something bad. Oh, you're about to do something horribly bad and you're like, you know, it's not good. It's not a good idea to take a ride from a stranger. Oh, what a fucked up thing to say before you do something bad to this poor woman.
Talking as he merged onto the highway, but Sotria was not listening at all. Instead, she was fixated on what he was doing with his right hand. His left hand was on the wheel, but with his right hand, he was fishing for something underneath his seat. And so Sotria's mind began to race. Without taking her eyes off of this man and what he was doing, she traced with her hand and felt for the door handle. But she couldn't feel it. And then she turned and realized there was no door handle. It had been removed. Just then, the man stopped rummaging around underneath his seat. Whatever he was looking for, he had found it. The man sat partway up and looked at Sotria with his hand still hidden behind one of his legs and a determined but emotionless expression on his face. At this point, Sotria felt her heart hammering so hard in her chest that she was worried she might pass out from terror. All she could think about was, what is he hiding behind his leg? What was underneath his seat? But then, something strange happened. The man's face changed from determined and almost cruel to confused. Sotria watched as his eyes darted up to the top of her head. The man told Sotria to take off her hat, and with trembling hands, she did as she was instructed, although she had no idea why he was asking. And when the hat was off her head, the man looked shocked, and he dropped whatever it was he had found back under his seat, and Sotria heard it land with a heavy metallic thud, but she couldn't see it. There was a long, tense silence, and then when the man finally spoke, he just said, "Why did you cut your hair?" The man immediately got off the highway and drove fast to Sotria's school. When they got there, he opened up the door for her and told Sotria to get out and said she was lucky. Then he drove away. Sotria didn't report this encounter to police.
What? Who did she escape? Who did she escape? 'Cause like, who did she encounter? 'Cause that is insane. Right? Like, all because she cut her hair. Whoever this was that had some evil plan just immediately checked. Immediately, once she realized she cut her hair, just like, nope, I can't do it now. It's like almost like he has a rule he has to live by on what someone has to look like before he does whatever the hell he plans to do to them.
She was kind of embarrassed that she had gotten into a stranger's car in the first place, and after all, the guy, despite being really creepy, hadn't hurt her at all, and so she basically just tried to forget about it. But a few years later, in 1975, Sotria was watching TV when she saw a familiar face come onto the screen. It was the man who had given her a ride, being led into a courtroom in handcuffs. Sotria dropped everything and turned up the volume, and what she heard made her numb with horror. because the newscaster was saying that this man who had given her a ride was a suspected serial killer accused of murdering dozens of young women who he would lure into his pale yellow Volkswagen Beetle and then bludgeon them to death with a crowbar or tire iron. And he had a very specific type when it came to identifying his victims. They were young women who all had long brown hair. And this man's name was Ted Bundy.
Oh my God! Oh my God, if I'm this woman, I'm freaking out. I'm going back, oh my God, I'm the luckiest human being alive. I am the luckiest human being alive. I got lucky that I cut my hair a few days ago, because if I did not, I would have been dead on arrival. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'd be losing my mind if I was her.
Me and the whole team at
Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all for the next one.